Welcome everyone to this Virginia Theological Seminary Center for Anglican Communion Studies Lunchtime Forum, the third of this academic year. My name is Wendy Bermudez, Development Associate for Database and Gift Processing for Institutional Advancement here at VTS. Welcome to those in the room and those joining us virtually, and a particular welcome to those listening to us through Spanish interpretation. Today we are honored to welcome Reverend Javier Garcia Ocampo, rector of the Episcopal Church of the Ascension, Gaithersburg, Maryland, who will speak to us about deconstructing stereotypes of Latin people, and the Reverend Catherine Campbell, rector of El Cristo Rey and San Marco in the Diocese of Virginia, who will speak about intra-Latin stereotyping and planting Anglo-Latin congregations. Thank you to the Center for Anglican Communion Studies for sponsoring this event and facilitating conversation about such an important topic. And now I'd like to turn to Dr. Catherine Grieb, Director of the Center, to say a quick word about the Center itself and our program today.
Thank you, Wendy. I should also take a moment to thank Raphael, our terrific interpreter, who's making this possible in a bilingual conversation. So important. My name is Catherine Grieb, and I'm the director of the Center for Anglican Communion Studies. I'm very pleased to be your co-host alongside Wendy Bermudez for our forum today. For those who are new to the Center for Anglican Communion Studies, we exist to resource practices for reconciliation, which we do with three main strategies: equipping international community, empowering intercultural leaders, and enriching Episcopal Anglican identity. And as I'm speaking, the Associate Director of CACS is putting the information about that on our website and Facebook, so you can follow us more at those two places and learn more about us. Since we know that not everyone can make these sessions, we are recording today so that others can access it later. So I want to remind those in the room to please wear your masks when you're not eating or drinking. This forum today builds upon our two previous forums. The first one, How Colonialism Worked, we heard about the origins and assumptions behind the project of colonialism and how it continued the logic of the Crusades into the New World. We also heard about resistance strategies, both from within the conquering forces and from the indigenous peoples who were the victims of it. Then our second forum dealt with liturgy as incarnation, and we heard from two Brazilian scholars, a theologian and a liturgist, about the challenges and promises of prayer book revision in Brazil. Today, we build on those themes of enculturation and colonialism as we address Latinos stereotyping and growing our Latinos congregations. Two very important conversations as the Episcopal Church becomes an increasingly multicultural, multilingual body. Both Javier Ocampo and Catherine Campbell are joining us live today, for which we are very grateful. Javier and Catherine, for your willingness to be here and for whatever it took for you to leave your busy parish work to get here to be with us today. We're grateful also for Wendy Bermudez, not only for her work here at VTS for the past 4 years, first in admissions and now in institutional advancement, but for all the talent she is bringing to this conversation and for multiple occasions when she has translated things for us that we needed on the spot. Really helpful. Wendy, we're excited to have you with us today as co-host. Thank you. And now let me hand that back over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Grieb, and thank you to the Center for Anglican Community Studies for this opportunity. I would like to welcome our first presenter, Father Ocampo. Originally from Jojutla, Mexico, the Reverend Javier Garcia Ocampo is the rector of the Church of the Ascension in Gaithersburg, Maryland. He has served there since the summer of 2014. Before coming to Maryland, he was the vicar of the Church of La Santa Cruz in the Diocese of Mexico City for 10 years. Father Ocampo comes to us today as one who loves languages and cultures and is fascinated by the opportunity to learn from different groups together. Please join me in welcoming Father Ocampo for his presentation.
Hello. The question we always have, can you hear me? Good afternoon. I am honored to be here speaking about something very dear to my heart, which is Mexican culture and Mexican celebrations and traditions. It has been quite a long time since I have been able to travel back to Mexico City, actually since 2014. So I may get a little sentimental about all of this. It has taken me a few years in the United States to realize that everyone, everywhere in the world participates in feasts, festivals, days of remembrance, holidays, religious or not, and agricultural rituals around planting and harvesting. Many of these activities have their roots in ancient worship and festivity rites. So it is not surprising that there are similarities across cultures in themes and presentation. But no one does it like Mexicans. We are all in, body and soul. But first, a little bit about me. Obviously, I am Mexican, you know. I know I don't have an accent, but I am Mexican. Born in Mexico City, in a country that is predominantly Roman Catholic. My family in both sides has been Anglican for 5 generations. It makes me a cradle Anglican or Episcopalian. My grandfather was a bishop and my father and uncle are priests. And you will see what I'm talking about this shortly. During my time in the United States, I have discovered that Americans generally have interesting notions about the feasts and holidays that we celebrate so enthusiastically in Mexico. Actually, I cannot be critical about this because myself, when I was living there, I had imagined all Americans to be very tall, which everybody can be taller than me, right? Blonde, blue eyes, and existing primarily on hot dogs and hamburgers. As it happens, this turned out to be quite inaccurate as I look around this room. I am often asked about Latino culture. And sometimes I stumble over this because there's nothing that is called Latino culture. There are 33 Latin American countries, and each one of them has its own culture, traditions, dialogues, and political outlook. If we are to look at the culture and tradition of a similarly sized land of mass of only 2 countries, let's say Canada and the US, even the citizens of those only two countries would protest the homogenization of all that they believe defines them. Culture is personal, eccentric, and beloved. Taking time to celebrate in community and in Thanksgiving for what the Lord has done matters. So let's talk about a truly Mexican holiday which has been appropriated in many other countries, and why that has happened. You know which one is that? No, es Día de los Muertos. We're going to talk about that, but later on. This one is Cinco de Mayo. Many people believe that Cinco de Mayo is Mexican, correct, Independence Day. But you know what? I must disappoint you. Cinco de Mayo, also called Anniversary of the Battle of Puebla, a holiday celebrated in parts of Mexico and the United States in honor of a military victory in 1862 over the French forces of Napoleon III. When in 1861, Mexico declared a temporary moratorium on the repayment of foreign debts, English, Spanish, and French troops invaded the country. By April 1862, the English and Spanish had withdrawn, but the French, with the support of wealthy landowners, remained in an attempt to establish a monarchy under Maximilian of Austria and to curb U.S. power in North America. On May the 5th, 1862, a poorly equipped Mestizo and Zapoteco force under the command of General Ignacio de Zaragoza defeated French troops in the Battle of Puebla, southeast Mexico City. About 1,000 French troops were killed. Although the fighting continued and the French were not driven out for another 5 years, the victory at Puebla became a symbol of Mexican resistance to foreign domination. The city, which was later renamed Puebla de Zaragoza, is the site of a museum devoted to the battle, and actually the battlefield itself maintained as a park. The day is celebrated in Mexican state of Puebla, obviously, right? With parades, speeches, and reenactment of the 1862 battle. Though it is not much noticed in most of the rest of the country. So we don't celebrate Cinco de Mayo like we do it here. I mean, we do, but we don't, you know. So why have you almost certainly heard of this rather specific day of remembrance? Perhaps it is because, like me, many Mexican immigrants are very sentimental about Mexico, proud of their heritage, and eager to celebrate with others. Enthusiasm for the festival grew in mid-20th century, particularly when it was explicitly linked with the promotion of alcoholic Mexican beverage. You know, that's very sad. And sadly, U.S. festivities tend to highlight negative stereotypes of Mexicans and to promote excessive drinking. So next, when you hear Feliz Cinco de Mayo, think of the brave, vastly outnumbered soldiers who saved their country. Don't think on tequila or nachos and guacamole. And now for another cultural surprise, a feast that the most people have heard of, but which we Anglicans in Mexico do not celebrate at all. You know which one is this one? Yeah, that's correct. This is the Lady of Guadalupe. In 1531, I know I'm using a lot of dates, right? But in 1531, a brown-skinned Madonna figure is supposed to have appeared to a simple indigenous person or man, speaking to him in his native language, which it was, Nahuatl. Yeah. Reports of miracles followed this apparition, and devotion to the Virgin grew. The story was used by the Spaniards who were evangelizing in Mexico as a way to bring native people to Catholicism. It was a successful strategy, right? However, by the later half of the 19th century, a complicated combination of political and religious fervor known as the movement, the Jesus movement, the first Jesus movement, arose. Its adherents were opposed to the centrally to have the Mary as the center of the religion, and they use the use of the images of the Virgin Mary and other saints and other devotional icons. So on September 29, 1878, members of the Church of Jesus, along with their minister, refused to participate in an Eucharist celebrating the Lady of Guadalupe. 25 members of the church were brutally killed in the town of Atzala, which is also in Puebla. I was brought up with this story firmly in mind and in my, genes, DNA, everything. Today, you will see no Anglican church in Mexico displaying an image of the Lady of Guadalupe and none conducting services in her honor. Instead, we remember and celebrate the martyrs of Atzala for their steadfast devotion to what they believe. When I came here to the States, I was a little bit shocked to see many Latino churches celebrating the Guadalupe Day. When in my heart, it was like, oh, I knew that many sincere people were killed for not doing it. I have to admit that it was something that I really didn't understand. I can say now, after some years being part of the Episcopal Church, sometimes, that I experienced this feast or this celebration a little bit different. Since the majority of our people came from the Roman Catholic Church, this is a good opportunity for us to evangelize them and let them know about our church and a different way to live as Catholics, but not Roman Catholics. I can see that we have a great tool to grow and be another option for people who are seeking Jesus, but seeking Jesus, not, a photocopy of the Roman Catholic Church. And that they want to be close to Jesus. What I do not like about this celebration is that usually all of us that grew up not celebrating the Lady of Guadalupe, on many occasions we are considered as, the weird people, or like the ones that they don't know better, or the ones that they're wrong. We should keep in mind, and this is very important, we should keep in mind that not all Mexicans are Roman Catholics, and not all Mexicans are Guadalupanos. But now, something a little bit, funnier. I would like to tell you about what is probably my favorite celebration or holiday. And this is perfecto. Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. And what do you think as you hear that? Does it sound creepy? No. Did you imagine it would be a sorrowful procession in black clothes? Or mournful gathering in the cemetery? You know what? Nothing could be farther from the truth. We do go to the cemetery. The day was originally conceived as a way to honor members of the Aztec community who had died. The Aztecs considered mourning the dead disrespectful, as they were still members of the community. Modern Mexico has added elements of their indigenous cultures, as well as a considerable overlay of Christianity. But the overwhelming sense of occasion is one of life, joy, and family. It is celebrated from October 31st to November the 2nd. Typically, so today, right? Typically, each home sets up an altar, not for worship, actually, but for remembrance. The structure holds favorite food and drinks that the deceased people liked, and usually that food and those drinks that killed them. Because we have, a lot of food that we shouldn't be eating. And we Mexicans believe, that the only reason that somebody will come back from the other side is to eat something, and drink something. But we also put pictures that bring back memories and candles to guide the spirit's ways. The smell and vivid color of marigold petals is powerful affirmation of life, even as death is recognized and accepted in the special sweet breads and decorated sugar skulls for everyone to eat, which they're actually delicious. Everyone gets dressed up in fancy clothes and celebrates life. Contrary to Halloween, where we wear costumes and masks, Dia de los Muertos clothes are not considered actually as costumes, but part of our culture and traditions. It is as if participants are made fully aware that death is not to be feared, that we are all one. Y yo con esto quiero decir feliz Día de los Muertos a todos. So I just want to say happy Day of the Dead to all of you. And Las Posadas. You know what Posadas is, right? Las Posadas is a religious festival celebrated in Mexico between December 16 and December 24. Las Posadas commemorates the journey that Mary and Joseph made from Nazareth to Bethlehem. Correct. Searching for a place of refuge where Mary could give birth to the baby Jesus. Each evening from all these days, a small child dressed as an angel leads a procession through the streets of the town. Usually, the procession is largely made up of children dressed in silver and gold robes and carrying candles and pictures of Mary and Joseph riding on a donkey. Adults, including musicians, follow this procession, which stops at selected homes asking for lodging. Traditionally, The procession is always refused lodging, although the host often provides refreshments against food, right? That's why we have these beautiful bodies. Traditionally, the procession is always refused lodging, and they get food. At each stop, the passages from the scripture are read. And a special song for the posadas is sung. Do you know the song? Don't make me sing. I can sing later, but not now because I sing horrible. At the conclusion of the event, there is often a party where children break open a piñata or piñata and enjoy treats and toys. Mexican culture is very community-centered. Most of the feasts, festivals, and days of remembrance include everyone in the community. I think this is quite important because it keeps us in touch with our roots and emphasize the enjoyment of what we have together. Mexican celebrations, in the end, are a powerful tool for preserving our culture, as well as a way to transmit its beauty to other cultures. But the same way we Mexicans are a community-centered culture, so the other Latin American cultures are. That is why it's very, very important that we know our community in order to celebrate with them their culture, because not all Latinos, Latinas, or Latinx feel connected or attracted to these particular Mexican celebrations. Thank you.
Brother Ocampo, thank you very much. Now we get to hear from Reverend Campbell and a brief word on her. Growing up in Mexico, the Reverend Catherine Campbell has spent 30 years working with Hispanic and Latin communities on the west and east coast of the United States. 10 years as the Hispanic missioner for the Diocese of Northern California, and then serving on the Virginia Coalition of Latino Organizations. And most recently, she has been the vicar of both La Iglesia Cristo Rey and La Iglesia Episcopal San Jose in Arlington, Virginia. She's a passionate advocate for affordable housing, and Reverend Campbell has also served as the president of Affordable Housing Corporation's Board of Directors. She's been involved in affordable housing projects and served as an advocate for immigrant communities wherever she leads.
Thank you very much. As Wendy said, I was born in Mexico, and I was raised in Mexico, went through high school down there. And one of the things about growing up in Mexico, especially as a kid, is the word that I got in and instilled in me through school is a celebration of being mestizo. Mestizo is mixed cultures, mixed blood. And so not white, not indigenous, but a mixture. And Mexico celebrates that. And so that's what I had in mind when I came to the United States. And I came to the United States when I was 16 and started going to a community college in Florida in a very, very, very conservative and very, very, very white area of Florida. And I soon became aware of racism that I had never experienced when I was in Mexico. And part of that made me aware that I had some gifts for Latino ministry. And so In Texas, I was a chaplain at a major hospital in which most of the folks were Spanish speaking, and there was nobody who would speak English or Spanish to them in the chaplaincy corps. So I had a ministry. But I still hadn't really come across with a whole lot of racism until I went through the process and I was told a white woman could not do Hispanic ministry, that only Latino men could do ministry to the Latino community. And then as I came to Virginia Seminary, yay, Virginia. And here, working with the Reverend Ivan Ramirez at San Jose, where I'm now the vicar, we did experience some basic racism. And within the churches that were being formed at that time, and well, this is in 1987, 88, so it's a while back, there were churches that would allow Hispanic ministry, but we couldn't use their altar. We had to set up another table. We couldn't, we were going to rob people. So we really couldn't associate with them. In California, I was kicked out of a wonderful, beautiful church because all of the children were going to break all of the stained glass windows in the church. And so one day I got there and the senior warden would not let me in. So part of it was learning how to try to work within a system that still had many stereotypes against the communities that I served. And part of those communities, part of those stereotypes were things that we have heard, that we're going to break all their windows, that we're going to be thieves, that we can't be trusted, that we're going to not take care of the property, that all Latinos are from Mexico. I mean, that was one of the first things that I had to try to dispel because I have served quite a few congregations and only one of them has been primarily Mexican, and that was in California. But in Delaware, I served a Dominican Puerto Rican congregation. When I was in seminary, San Jose was mostly a South American community. And I started San Marcos, which is a Salvadoran community. And right now I have a Bolivian community and a Central American community. And all are very different. And as the Reverend Ocampo said, one needs to learn the communities because they're very, very different. I tried to start Las Posadas at San Jose with a Bolivian congregation, and it never took off, much to my dismay, because I love Las Posadas. But another thing that came into my consciousness as I was working with the Latino community is the racism and prejudice that they have against each other. When I was in seminary, in between my middler and senior years, I went and spent 8 weeks in Colombia. And in Colombia, I went to different Episcopal churches or Anglican churches throughout and was trying to preach and tell them a little bit about the Anglican Communion. And we had dinner at the bishop's house one night. And I was taken aback. The bishop proudly said that he did not have a drop of indigenous blood in him, and that Colombia really did not have an indigenous population anymore. And he said it with such pride that I was just flabbergasted. I just could not understand. And then when I began to be the vicar or in charge of Latino congregations, I heard over and over those Mexicans or those Salvadorans or those Nicaraguans or those whatever within the congregations that I was serving. And I was, again, sort of taken aback because that wasn't my experience in Mexico. Understanding that I was a child and an adolescent in Mexico, and so I probably didn't have the full scope of the prejudice and racism when I was growing up. When I went on a trip to Costa Rica, 4 strangers came up to me, a taxi driver and some vendors and somebody at a hotel, started talking in negative terms against the Nicaraguans. And I'm sitting there saying, why? I mean, they're telling total strangers about their dislike of Nicaraguans. So I began to try to look at the reasons why this was happening. And Caitlin Farrat, a professor of international studies at California State University, studied the racism in Nicaragua. And she states, in Costa Rica, Nicaraguans make 75% of the immigrants and they represent 7% of the total population. They often work in agriculture, construction, and service sectors, much like the Latino population here in the United States. Nicaraguan migration to Costa Rica is not new, she writes, but attitudes towards Nicaraguans has become more prejudiced since the mid-20th century. Where Nicaraguans were seen as inherently violent, Costa Ricans see themselves as peace-loving. Where Nicaraguans are seen as poor, illiterate, and uncultured, the Costa Ricans see themselves as middle-class and educated. Where Nicaraguans are mestizo and dark-skinned, the Costa Ricans are white. And as I was researching this, I saw so many similarities of all of the prejudice that I was hearing here in the United States towards the Latin American population. The same sense of inferiority, discrimination, racism for a group, the other. In a system, in a study on the educational system in Ecuador, Carlos de la Torre writes that he found that the mestizos and the whites basically did everything in their power to systemically keep the indigenous people down. In a study that Edward Tells and Lisa Steele in their papers, The Effects of Skin Color in the Americas, conclude that skin color correlates with educational attainment. Throughout Latin American countries have long sought to claim immunity from the racial and ethnic divisions that plague the rest of the world, they say. But it is changing, including in Bolivia, Colombia, Mexico, Paraguay, and Peru. They've begun to recognize the diverse nature of their societies and constitutionally declare themselves as multicultural. Yes, wow, they're multicultural. But yet, if you follow the education and the level of achievement, the whiter you are, the more prosperous you become. The more indigenous you are, the school systems are worse, the opportunities are worse. And so, studying all of this, I understood a little bit more about some of the dynamics between my congregations and the racism between them. I have, right now, I've got 2 congregations that are 3 miles apart. the cultures from where the members of our congregations come from. And my celebrations are very much different from a Mexican congregation. And they're all have a cultural theology to them. And it can be a pure joy. But just like we can't whitewash the stereotypes that we have against people of color here in the United States, we have to recognize that sin of trying to understand that groups want to define themselves up and against other groups is universal. And that as clergy people, it is our job to try to address some of those issues. And so that's
Thank you very much for that. We have about 10 minutes, a little bit more than that, for discussion. And so I'd like to invite questions. I'm sure there's a lot going on in your heads. I'd like to invite questions from the audience online in the chat. And for those in person, Garrett has mics that will feed both into this room and into our online situation. So please let him come to you and speak into that mic so that everyone can hear the question. We probably won't get to all your questions. We'll do as many as we can. And please speak your questions slowly so that Raphael can do his work of interpretation. So let's begin now with questions from the floor. Questions welcome. Questions, comments? Is some of this new? Something surprise you? Something interest you?
Thank you for this interesting presentation. You talked some about the diversity in terms of liturgy. What are some of the issues you've encountered with music and the diversity among the different groups?
when I first started at San Jose 35 years ago, and it was a mostly South American congregation. And the Reverend Ivan Ramirez came from a Baptist background. He really loved classical German hymns translated into Spanish. And he was brought up with that. Some of the old translations of the hymns that we have in the 1980 hymnal. The Salvadorans like more folksy tunes. And so we use Floricanto, which has a mixture of hymns and folksy tunes. So there has been a difference in what different groups have liked.
What are you using?
Yeah, may I say something about that? Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
So with the, like with the pandemic, we have some blessings through it. And one of those blessings is that my family in Mexico, they have been able to join our services on Zoom, and the Anglican Church in Mexico, we have a hymnal just like we have here, the English one. And like she said, is one of the translations from those old but pretty hymns. And so we use Floricanto in at Ascension, and I was surprised because I had to learn those songs, hymns, whatever you want to call them, because I didn't know, I didn't grow up with them, with those. So now that my sisters and sometimes my dad comes to the services we have, they keep texting me and saying like, oh, can we sing those hymns that we like? Because like Floricanto is like Roman Catholic Church, you know, and it's actually a Roman Catholic hymnal, and which I was surprised that we are using it here. I mean, I have nothing against the Roman Catholic Church. It's just like they have their own theology and their own hymnals, and we have our own ones. And if we have one in Spanish, I don't know why we're not using it, you know. And yeah, but if you go to Mexico, the only thing that you're gonna hear in most of the churches is just hymns like we hear here in the English churches, but not as pretty as they are here because we don't have all these, you know, organs and things like that, but we will be singing the same thing. Yeah, thank you.
I want to thank you so much for, explaining some things that I never understood. I was supervising a church in New York where they had the Lady of Guadalupe in the church because we had a Spanish-speaking congregation. And every Sunday when we came back, somebody had removed the picture. And we never understood why. I asked one time and somebody said, just, casually, oh, they worship, these things. But now I understand why they do that. But I always say that you have to understand somebody's culture. You have to have knowledge of what they do before you make a judgment. And I stand by what I say, and I thank you for the explanation. So now I'm more enlightened to even explain why they do what they do. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just let me just respond. When I started at San Jose, this the second time around, and it was it's a Bolivian congregation. They had a big Virgen de Urcupiña festival.
Would you say what that is?
Yes. And that's supposedly the apparition of the Virgin Mary in a certain town in Bolivia. And I had never heard of the Virgin of Urcupiña, but they had, at our church, had a great big festival. And so when I got there, it was very hard to I mean, you can't just stop a festival like that and stop their traditions. So you learn their traditions, preach Jesus, and understand that it was very important for them culturally. And it was very, very cultural, not religious, that feast. But slowly but surely, most of my congregation have no longer felt the need to have that celebration and that festival. And so through time and education and what is the Episcopal Church and our practices, you can go from one to another. And so, but it takes time.
We might just notice that if you were to go to the Basilica of the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception at Catholic University, you would, in addition to the huge building, see a gazillion side altars, each of them dedicated to an apparition of the Virgin Mary in some different country. Yeah.
We have two questions from Zoom for either one of you to answer. So start with the first from Miller Cook, and asking, do you have a sense that most of our Latino parishes are going to be international, or are the majority derived primarily from one country? If so, how can inclusivity be fostered?
That's a complicated question. Um, because it's not just nation of origin, it's socioeconomic, it's education, and all of those are mixed into it. As I said, my two congregations are 3 miles apart. And my Central American congregation is I find more open to being multicultural. So we have Mexicans, we have Chilean families. It's primarily Salvadoran, Guatemalan, but we have other groups, and they're warmly embraced. I find that the Bolivian congregation tends to be Bolivia, Ecuador, Peru, and not as multicultural in their outlook. Although, so part of it is, but part of it has to do with education, and even though they might be doing the same types of jobs, a lot of it has to do with education and culture, and their music likes are different, and so but it's a complicated question.
Yeah, like I said before, I think one of the first thing that we need to do is like to get to know the people that we have, and see where they're coming from, and then go from there, because yeah, it is a little bit complicated to celebrate something if we don't know like who they are and where they're coming from. And usually we have now that I'm here, I have an idea like the territories, like there's more in Maryland. We have a lot of people from El Salvador, but if you go to Chicago, you have more Mexicans up there. And if you go to New Jersey, New York, that area, you have more like Puerto Ricans and Dominicans. So you have, and if you go to Florida, you have a lot of Cubans there. You can have an idea, but you never have a real idea until you know the congregation and get to know them. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yes,
Yes.
they do make sense.
The second question builds off that in a way. Susan Walker asked, what are respectful ways that a primarily white congregation can engage with Latina congregations' celebrations, traditions without talking over?
The first thing that we need to realize is that not all Latinos are Mexicans. That they're not Mexicans from Mexico and Mexicans from Cuba or Mexicans from Colombia. When I introduce myself, I always say I'm a real Mexican because I'm Mexican from Mexico. But answering your question, it's if we're gonna be respectful, we need like if I have a congregation full of Argentinians and I want to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, then it won't make sense to them. It's like, but if I want to celebrate like Dia de los Muertos with people from Chile, probably they don't do the same thing. So when we try to be respectful, probably we need to again get to know our community. I think that's the first thing that we need to do. Get to know people and not assume that everybody celebrates the same things, and not that we don't do. I know we all look like the same, but we're not actually the same. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add something.
And in my experience with Anglo congregations or English-speaking congregations that want to be open to Latino congregations, I agree with the Reverend Ocampo. I mean, part of it is just getting to know the folks without making any assumptions, actually speaking with them, having conversations, not making assumptions. When we've gotten thrown out of English-speaking congregations, it's because that there wasn't that dialogue. there was just assumptions, and that's not healthy. So I would say that, I mean, we celebrate Pentecost together with the English-speaking congregation. That's not enough. But one of the things we found is as we tried to do other celebrations together, and attendance was down on both sides. And so really getting to understand and care for one another has to be the starting point.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed listening to your presentations. My question is a follow-up to just what you were answering there, Catherine. In terms of practical steps, as students or seminarians, lay people, ordained people, what practical steps have you seen work well in congregations who are seeking to build community and build awareness about one another?
Listening. Number one step is just entering into conversations, not with just the clergy person, but with members of the congregation, with a diverse group of members of the congregation, to really be interested in who they are and what their story is. Unless you really have that the heart of wanting to get to know the other, it won't happen. So, I mean, that's the first step, is just the desire to, and taking the time to listen and to care for one another. The second one is do some of the background stuff. I mean, I really do think that if you're going to go to Wilmington and have a Puerto Rican Dominican congregation, that you need to know Dominican Puerto Rican background. So I think that it's important to understand where folks came from, and what their socio-political, I mean, because with the Salvadoran community, there was, for example, the Oscar Romero, wonderful saint, except that I have members in my congregation that were served in the military, forcefully, but they served in the military. And so when we celebrate, that, they're also remembering their friends that died. So part of it is understanding the politics of where they came from, and really getting to know who they are.
Sadly, we've come to the end of our time, and it's really, I feel like in many ways we've hardly begun, but we have actually made, it seems to me, tremendous progress in this conversation today. And that is thanks to our two guest speakers and the excellent questions that were asked. Thank you to Wendy Bermudez, my co-host. Thank you to Reggie, who has made all things possible electronically, and to the CAC staff members over there, and to Raphael, our interpreter, for another wonderful job. Thank you very much to all of you for coming. We are grateful for your presence here and online. Thank you so much. Adios.